Washington may be divided on a variety of topics, but one thing everyone seems to agree on is the need to address high drug prices. And to move that forward, the Senate Finance Committee, led by Republican Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, will hold hearings today where top executives from 7 major pharmaceutical companies will answer questions about the problem and what's to be done about it. Welcome, Chairman Grassley. Now back to Bloomberg, coming to us from Capitol Hill. Welcome, Senator. It's good to have you.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
So give us an insight into what you're thinking about. You're the chairman of this committee. Okay. Congress enacts legislation. What sorts of legislation is on the table that might affect drug prices?
Yeah. Pay for delay with Klobuchar and I as co-sponsors. Another one with Leahy and me that are called under the acronym CREATES. I'll explain the first one. Pay for delay is patent runs out, the brand company pays the generic company to keep their generic off the market for a few years, and so that keeps the brand price higher. It doesn't get the competition from the generic. The other one is to get information to the FDA through the generic company from the company that had the brand name, and those companies are not willing to give it up. But if it's given up or bought, however it happens, then that information goes to the FDA, and it cuts short the time that FDA has to review that drug and get the generic on the market sooner. And then as far as our hearings are concerned, there's no legislation planned right now, but there probably will be legislation. And by the way, your opening comments that this is a very bipartisan issue is very correct. We hope to get from the executives today all the information we can of how they arrive at a list price. And it's very important to arrive at the list price because that's the price that starts everything off at the higher level. Then you have the rebate. So you have a list price up here, you have the rebates in between. Why isn't the consumer paying this lower price in the first place? What sort of miracle or what sort of mystery do you have to have in drug pricing? So our idea is to get to the bottom of some of this secrecy, to get some transparency in the system so the marketplace works, and then in the end get a lower price for drug prices.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm really glad you raised the rebate question because I suspect that will come up during the hearings today. When you talk to at least some of the drug executives that you have before you today, they will say a lot of the problem is the so-called PBMs, these intermediaries, and there's this big rebate system, and that's keeping the list price up. We know that the HHS now has proposed regulations to really cut back on that with respect to publicly funded drugs. Is there any proposal to deal with it altogether across the private sector? That is basically to eliminate those rebates.
Well, I can't answer that question right now because I don't have a conclusion on that point. But we want to concentrate on the list price, and we do not want these executives today to pointing fingers at somebody else is to blame. What goes into the list price? Now, you did bring up the pharmacy benefit managers. They're a very important part of this. In less than a month, we'll probably have a hearing based upon what the role is of the pharmacy benefit managers. But we need some answers as to how these prices are set, what happens with $170 billion of rebates. Why can't we have one price for everybody, basically?
Another subject that came up just yesterday, you spoke out on the question of the national debt ceiling and the fact that it might be as late as October before that gets raised. And in fact, I can confirm what you already know, which is the bond market's reacting. T-bill market really has shown up. People are getting nervous about those T-bills coming due sort of September, October time. Why would it take that long? Why wouldn't it be better for the markets and everyone concerned to just raise it now?
Yeah. Well, listen. I should be able to have an answer to that, and you aren't going to like the answer, but it's because Congress never makes a decision until the midnight hour. So March 1st is roughly the midnight hour. But then in the meantime, everybody in Congress knows that the Treasury Department has the capability of borrowing, taking money from this sinking fund or that trust fund and keeping the government running, borrowing, and then And when we finally make a decision pay back, I would think the bond market would know the game that's been going on in Congress for the last probably 50 years, that they wouldn't get nervous, that they would expect that Congress is going to do what we always do, make sure that we pay our bills. It's pretty simple. You know, if people don't want to increase the debt limit, then you shouldn't spend so much money in the first place.
Yeah, it seems reasonable, at least in the household. That's exactly right. So one thing that Congress does seem to be moving forward on is actually this House resolution to pull back on the declaration of a national emergency to build that wall. Before the president declared it, you said you thought it would be a mistake. It was a dangerous precedent for the president to do that. Where are you right now now that the president has declared the national emergency? Should Congress step in and pull it back?
The answer is no. So what you heard me say previously, I'm looking at the national security responsibilities of the federal government to be the #1 responsibility of our government to protect the American people. And when you have drugs coming in, you have criminals coming in, you have human trafficking, sex trafficking, all these things are a violation of our law. They're not protecting the American people, and we ought to protect the American people. The only thing that I would disagree with the president on is he could have got 4 out of the $8 billion with authority he already has under existing law to transfer funds. He really didn't need to do the national emergency, but I think he wants to make the point to the American people that Congress is not doing enough that I have a responsibility to do as commander-in-chief to protect the American people, and so I'm going to take all the actions I can. Now, it tends to be that we're blaming the President of the United States for this, but he's doing it under a law that was passed in 1976. So I think what we need to do is review so much delegation and discretion we've given to the President of the United States for the last 8 or 9 presidents. We need to review that. I'm doing that with the President's ability to impose tariffs for national security reasons. In my Finance Committee, we're going to be reviewing legislation like Toomey's and like Portman's that would change some of the dramatic delegation of authority that a 1962 law gave under Kennedy to presidents that hasn't been used very much. But if the president has too much authority, it's Congress's power, not the president's. I mean, it's the Congress's fault, not the president.
That was going to be my last question about Section 232. We've talked about that before, and you're concerned there's been too much delegation to the president. Is that legislation going to see the light of day, and can you get it past a veto if President Trump vetoes it?
I can't answer the last question because I don't know how many votes we got in the first place, but I can tell you getting it through the Congress, we're going to have a bipartisan bill to get that done, and we're going to get it done if that was the question you were asking me.
That is exactly the question. Okay, thank you so much, Chairman Chuck Grassley. He is a senator from Ohio. Great to have you with us, sir.